Thank you, Sylvie. That was an interesting take. And I don't have a presentation as such. I would like to reflect on what we have discussed this evening. Um, First, to begin with, what Sylvie said that about telling stories belonging to other communities. There is a small island in Philippines, and the I forget the name of that particular island. The storytellers in that particular island, they have their own stories, and they possess the story, and they are only entitled to tell that story. So the practice is that the storyteller possesses the story, and the storyteller would tell it to other people, and then almost like handing over your property, the at the when he feels that he is no more going to tell the story, he is going to hand this story to someone else and entitle only that particular person to tell that story. So this is a very strange practice, and the entire community would respect this practice, and they would appreciate this kind of what you call possessing the story. So this is something very interesting which I read recently in a book about storytelling. Apart from definitely the democratic way of using stories and how stories live through telling itself, we have been discussing this throughout in our Kathakali workshops and different other engagements that we are having. We are talking about that stories live only through telling. So the more we tell, it lives. But there are certain stories which I think a particular story has got the right to tell that story. And maybe the story, sometimes, if the storyteller does not entitle someone else to tell that story, the story dies with that person. It happens like that. And there are different practices. So, this is some practice which I wanted to mention here in this related to the discussion that we were having regarding cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. A wonderful word, or rather a phrase coined by Sylvie. To start with, why do we tell stories? I've got another story about it. Why do we tell stories? This is a Jewish story. It's from the Hasidic Judaistic founder named Rabbi Israel Shevlov. Now, he was the founder of this Hasidic Judaism. Now, every time the Jews would be in trouble, he would go to a forest, and then he would pray. He would light a fire and he would pray. And then, after the praying, he would accomplish some power, and the Jews would be freed from that problem. So, every time the problem would come, this rabbi would go and do this prayer. After his death, it was next Majidi of Meritz, who was the next responsible person for the Jews. Then he came to know about it, and then he would also go to the forest, but he would forget the prayer. He would light the fire, he would go to that particular place, and he would light the fire, and then he would tell it to the God that, God, I can light the fire, I have come to that same place, but I've forgotten the prayer. So will I be empowered? God says, okay, okay, it is okay, fine, you can go ahead. And so he would also get that power, and the Jews would be protected. And then came the other, his the next after his death. We have his name was Rabbi Israel from Renins, and then he would go to the same forest, and he would say, I have come to the same place, but unfortunately I don't know how to light the fire, and I have also forgotten the prayer, because the prayer was, I never heard the prayer. So, but I have come to that place. So should I get that power? Should I get that power? God says, okay, fine, you've come to that place, so you'll get that power. And like that, the Jews were protected. And then finally, we have the last one. And he sits on the armchair and says that God, and then folds his hand and puts it on his forehead and says that I have forgotten the place where the others used to go. I have also forgotten the prayer, and I don't know how to light the fire. So, but I can tell you the story of what happened. So then would I get the power? The God was excited. He said, why not? Of course, you'll get the power. Because God loves to hear stories, you know. That is what I feel. Because God wants to hear stories, we were actually empowered to tell stories. So this is a very interesting tale about the beginning of stories. Now, we have already kind of spent 2 hours discussing stories at such wonderful viewpoints that you have all shared. Your worldviews are so interesting. The stories actually, I feel, completes us. We are all born, we are rather, I think, human beings are incomplete. And this process of living life is a journey towards completion. And this incompleteness that is there, we should know how to appreciate that incompleteness. And that incompleteness is a part of our existence. And it is also discussed in the spirituality of incompleteness, that how all these striving for completeness is something that we we do through all our activities like storytelling, education, cultural activities, political activities. Everything is to reach towards that completeness. So, but how does storytelling help us to reach to that completeness? Now, in this age, when we are more bothered about the time that we are living in, and more bothered about news, and more bothered about, contemporary happenings, then these kind of timeless tales, because timeless tales are something that the modern generation is losing contact. Just a minute. I must switch it off. I'm so sorry. Okay, so this timelessness of stories is something that we are not able to make the new generation aware of. And so we are losing this art of storytelling, which definitely people like Gauri and people like Sylvie and Enedina and Maya, they're all trying. And definitely all over, everybody is trying hard. But if you look at the general scenario, listening to stories is almost becoming an obsolete practice, and people are not interested. They are more into the nowness, they are more into the news, they are more into something that is much faster, and they don't want to go into the slowness of these stories. That is something that I have also felt while interacting with young people. uh, Joseph Conrad has said that it is words which is the greatest enemy of reality. Like words are actually incapable of taking us to the reality, of making us feel the reality. So many a times I feel that we are more engaged into these wordy existence, like we are more using words to kind of describe ourselves. More limited uh, tools are being used to appreciate ourselves or appreciate life itself. So what is happening that this limited use of words is actually taking us away from reality. So then what is the way? Then what is the way to get the experience of the reality? Then we find the the better way from above the word is images. Like images are far more expressive. So then we kind of take shelter into images, and we see that how images are in abundance in our communication these days through Instagram, through photos, through WhatsApp, and through Facebook, and all these mediums are full of images. But what the images are also limited is that images don't allow us to see, and simultaneously, while you see, you are not allowed to feel and think. So this simultaneous activity of seeing, feeling, thinking together happens only with, and another thing is imagination. Because when you see a visual thing, then usually what your imagination gets limited, because you are almost visually you are seeing a particular thing, then you are governed, your imagination, your thoughts are being governed by that image. So, because of that limitation, it is said that storytelling allows that expanse, which can lead you to the reality, which can give you that experience of the absolute. It is stories, because stories are vehicles which actually take you to these stage where the metaphors actually these profound metaphors, they transform into experiences, and these experiences are full of imagination, full of seeing, thinking, and feeling. So stories are the tools which empowers us, and that is why you try to strengthen the community through storytelling, whether it is adult community or whether it is kids, but you empower people through stories. This is something which I thought I would share. The second thing was what Dennis asked was about archiving stories. Now, which Gauri had also said that oral stories, how do you archive stories? Now, if you see this storing of stories, where do they go in? Like, where do we store stories? Uh, Recently, I wrote a paper where I had looked into this aspect of storing stories in our bodies. There is a concept in our Shastra called Runanubandha. Runanubandha means the memory that is actually stored in your body. And if you see, many of us might feel that the story that is being told, or that is being uttered, or that is being performed, is not being performed by the body, but the inner self. And if you go deeper inside, then you might call that it is your consciousness, or the Atman, or the inner self, or the Brahman, that is telling the story. But according to our Shastra, it is said that the inner self is not active at all. It is the physical body which actually gets in touch with the consciousness. Means the consciousness is unaffected. But when the consciousness gets in touch with this physical body, the physical body which doesn't have any power, because if the consciousness is removed from the body, if that prana is removed from the body, then this body is useless. The body doesn't function, then this body can't do anything. But when this body is in touch with the consciousness, that it forms, then only the body starts functioning. So it is this functioning body which actually tells the story, not that Atman, not that inner self. Now, this body has been kind of categorized into different levels, as you know. According to yoga, we have five bodies. We have Pancha Kosha, you know, Annamaya Kosha, the physical body. Then you have Pranamaya Kosha, the vital body. Then you have Manomaya Kosha, which is the intellectual body. Then you have Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is the intuitive body, and finally the blissful body, which is the Anandamaya Kosha. So, but all these are bodies, but this is not the self. So even Anandamay Kosha is not the self. So Anandamay Kosha is not, so the self is not telling the story. It is the body which is telling the story. When the body is telling the story, then the story is being stored in the body. It is being stored in the physical body. It is being stored in the vital body. It is being stored in the intellectual body as well as in the intuitive body, and definitely at a blissful state also you have the story. So what happens is that this, because the story is stored in different levels, and at different levels different elements of the story is stored. So what happens when you only perform a story as you have heard? It is at the gross level. You only physically you try to copy that story. But when it reaches the vital level, the prana level, the story then metamorphs, it transforms, it changes. It kind of changes into different forms. And that is why when your prana gets connected with the prana of the audience, so it changes accordingly. And then your physical body is not performing the prana, the vital body is also performing. So your story, the same hare and tortoise story, keeps on changing. The same story of Sati becomes a different story in Egypt because the prana connection is getting different. And it goes to the finer levels. It goes to the intellectual body, it goes to the intuitive body, and then the cosmic body, the blissful body, and the story keeps on transforming. And the deeper you go and get connected, the story comes to its elemental level, which Sylvie had mentioned slightly, the seed level, the seed. It comes to that seed level when it is at that kind of blissful or the cosmic level the story is being. So there is in actually in Shiva Purana the body is divided into three, not five, as in yoga. In Yoga Shastra, it is five, but in Shiva Purana, it says there are three bodies. One is the Sthula body, that is the gross body. Another is the Shukshma body, the subtle body. The subtle body includes all the three, the vital, the intellectual, and the intuitive. And the last one, the cosmic body, is known as the causal body, the Karana Sharira. The Karana Sharira. So I feel stories get stored in our bodies. If you read Katha Sarit Sagar, in the beginning of the story, you will find the writer of Katha Sarit Sagar, that is Gunadhya, who actually writes that, who actually tells the stories. He is actually writing with his blood, and he's writing in a language which is known as Paishachi. And Paishachi is a language which is not being spoken by human beings, not being spoken by gods or any beings, but it is a different language. Now, there is a question that what is this different language that he is evolving to tell the story? He was actually cursed by Parvati, because there's a story you must be knowing that Shiva actually told this story to Parvati. And when Parvati was listening to this story, this was there was this another character, I'm forgetting the name, Kanibhuta or Kunabhuta, who actually overheard the story. And then he picked up the story. And because this story was mentioned, this story was only meant for Parvati, and it was heard by Kanabhuti. Yes, Kanabhuti. It was heard by Kanabhuti. The story did not kind of develop, or it did not actually had its proper effect on the listener, and that is why he was cursed. And then he became a pishacha himself, and then he told that story to Gunadhya, and Gunadhya stored that story in his blood. Now this can be a metaphor. Storing the story in blood means storing the story in your body, because blood is an essential part of your body. So I feel this archiving, storytelling archiving, can only happen through bodies, and which I think Ruth Sawyer, an English British storyteller, she keeps on saying that stories live only through telling. So if the, which Gauri also mentioned, that it is somewhere, it's somewhere in the cosmos, it's somewhere in the air, it's somewhere in these different five panchabhutas, and somewhere someone gets that, like Gunadhaya getting it from Kanabhuti, like Kanabhuti getting it from Parvati. So you can pick those things up and then again tell the story, and it goes on. The circular effect, the life of the story is almost like a life of a human being. You get reborn, and again you live a life, and again you get reborn. So every time you tell a story, so if you consider rebirth, every rebirth is something new. So every rebirth for a story is obviously new, even if you are telling that same story using the same words, almost using the same action. But because things have changed, because time has changed, because your voice quality has changed, physically also you cannot kind of repeat it. Because in Shabda Tattva, that means in the Shastra, it is saying that you cannot repeat one particular sound twice. You cannot repeat it. You also cannot copy somebody else's sound identically. You can never do it. Just equal copy is not possible. So when equal copy is not possible, how can you kind of repeat the story as it was told? It can never be repeated. Even if you feel that it is being repeated, it is not, because the quality of the voice is different, emphasis is different. Your total telling would be affected by the environment, the time, your health, your physicality, your mental avastha, your mental state. Everything is going to affect it. So it goes on changing and changing and changing. So the change is, I think, the truth about story. So what Sylvie was talking about, that is it a cultural appropriation, or is it giving life to a story? I think it is giving life to the story. You are giving life. You are allowing it to live, and that is what every culture wants. Apart from that small little island in Philippines, which has its own reservation. So this is what small little sharing that I had, because we have already spent a long time. Yes, 2 hours 42 minutes. So it's pretty long time we have discussed story. That proves that story has a long, long life. We can do more talking. So I won't kind of go on with my
Can
blabbering.
I just say a little something?
Yes, Sylvie, please go
As
ahead.
you were referring to the island in the Philippines where stories are given to a certain person, well, it's the same for the native people here. A person is chosen a
Okay.
community to to hold, to bear with her, this person, the specific story, and the teller of the story is that specific person only. So I find it very fascinating to see that there's the same
Yeah, same
practice.
practice. Yes, we are all connected. We can't avoid this. We can't avoid this. We are all. Oh, one more thing. You told me about Sati. I remembered about Sati, these 51 parts of Sati, these 51 places that it was spread across the country, and also one outside the country also in present day Pakistan. These 51 places are associated with the 51 letters of Sanskrit. They are associated with 51 letters of Sanskrit. It is said that these 51 letters of Sanskrit emerged from the 51 parts of Sati's body. So these letters are universal letters according to Sanskrit language. So these 51 pithas, these places where these body parts are spread across the country, they are known as pithas, and they have all these body parts, and every body part is associated with one letter, one syllable.